Well, hello, my name is Reverend Dr. Tracey Allshafer, and you're watching The Quantum Healer. And I have the privilege today of meeting with my good friend, Rich Braconi, who is a spiritual medium. And he's written this fabulous book, Being More of God. So we have a lot to talk about. Particularly, I want to start with, how does mediumship, how does that fall into a potential healing for someone?
You know, and it's a great question. It really, really is. I really believe, or I really know, that there's a misinterpretation of what mediumship is. And so, as you know, I'm self-taught and self-learned. So I didn't start off with a gift. The communication that I demonstrate at my events, mediumship, is a process that I learned on how to shift yourself, and everybody has the ability of doing this, into a pathway of a communication where you get inspired with knowledge that's not first stored in your head. And everybody has this ability. I learned the process, and because I'm self-turned, I can understand it now, rather than just, you know, having an ability when I was born and not understanding how the communication works. So that's the first thing I want to share with people, that mediumship is just a small part of this communication.
Okay.
So I started off talking to a higher power. I then shifted into a philosophy that was based on unconditional love, that promoted a greater harmony and unity in my life, not only within me, but between me and other people. And that was cool. And then it shifted to, I started seeing medical imbalances in people, and then it shifted into me talking to people in spirit. A big part of mediumship when it comes to healing is people walking through life. Very often when you lose someone and you look at it, I lost something. What if they were never yours to begin with? And so it's coming from a spiritual perspective rather than a mental perspective about life.
Right.
So healing comes into play, where a lot of people would like to know that their loved ones in spirit really exist, that they're fine, that they're doing well in life, just like you do here.
Yeah.
So when I put on these events, and people come to the events, that I share with them that what you're about to experience is a communication. The knowledge, or the source of knowledge, that I'm getting or connecting to comes from outside of me. So this is information that's not first stored in my head. I don't know who you are. I never met your loved ones in spirit.
Right.
I don't know any kind of experiences or information you had together. But then when I point to someone, and this is an actual demonstration where I'll point to someone and I'll say, oh, your son is standing behind you. And he's telling me the name of Mark. And he's saying that he passed away from a self-destructiveness in his life. He's saying that he overdosed. He's saying that you found him in his bedroom, and it was in the month of December. And he wants me to say thank you for all the help and guidance that you provided him. And he also wants me to say thank you for the bracelet that contains his ashes that you're wearing on your left hand. Now that's an actual demonstration of many, many similar moments that have occurred at my events. So now this woman, whose mental perspective is going, I'm not quite sure he's alive, I messed up in life. And now from a spiritual perspective, which I'm demonstrating, that a spiritual part of us exists. There's a spiritual intelligence within us. And I just got really good at it. Or better at it than I ever have been. And then when you watch her in front of, say, 35 people, and I say, okay, now you tell everybody how much of that information makes sense. And she says everything.
All of it. The whole thing.
Now, she has shifted to going, well, what if this is true? Where her brain didn't believe it was. And now she's saying it is. And she's seeing proof of it all. And then he goes on and adds more information. Very often it's information that she currently did during the day, just earlier, that nobody knows about.
Right.
And he'll share a piece of information or two of something she early did, and she goes, how's that possible? And I say, because he saw you. We were never physical to begin with, we were spirit. Our spirit gives life to our physical body. Stop pretending it didn't. Start to realize who you are, that love is a communication, and once she knows that her loved one in spirit now in the afterlife is fine, and always has been. She's now empowered to start to live her life again.
Yeah.
And I've seen that hundreds of times at my events.
Yeah.
Really cool.
How many galleries have you done? How many experiences have you shared? Do you know?
Thousands.
Thousands.
I've been doing this again, and this is something too. I never wanted to do this.
Yeah.
Never was in my plans.
Well, Rich has a really unique story. You were a detective in Trenton.
Undercover detective in Hamilton Township. Worked with Trenton a lot, spent many, many years working with the prosecutor's office.
Yeah.
In that capacity, yeah.
And then, he has a really beautiful story, as I think, most people can relate to. You go through challenges in your life, things happen, but you were able to really turn so much around that put you in a place of being a more spiritually connected person, aligning yourself more with spirit, and through that process, they're not really, I don't know, people say gifts, skills, whatever, but I believe, like you, we all have this ability.
Correct. Abilities, you just said it.
Ability,
They're
there you
abilities.
go, it's ability.
And it's true.
And you were able to, what was the first moment for you when you realized something was happening or shifting, this ability was coming through?
So two things. So just to slightly turn around, the greatest healing I've ever seen wasn't to other people, it was to myself.
To yourself.
And I'm not just saying that, it really was true. So what you said 15 years ago, I started from a place where I felt alone. And I was by myself, and I was divorced, and I was away from my daughter, and I was in debt financially. And I started from this really, really low point where I had nobody in my life.
Yeah.
And so I turned to my roots of being taught that God existed, that love prevailed. And so it was nothing more than an endeavor on my end, a truthful endeavor, to seek whether or not there really is a part of me that I wasn't given an education for that has a connection to God. And that was my starting point, and that's all it was. And so when I go back to 15 years ago when I first started, the moment that triggered all this for me, because you start off with a blind faith. You really, really do. You start off going, I believe it's true. That's your brain. Now I need to know it's true. That's your spirit. So anything you say with these words, I believe, that's your mental thinking. And then there's a part of you that says, no, I know. And that's your spirit. And that was the starting point for me.
Okay.
When I started looking at my life, my past choices, in a sincere way, of seeking whether or not there was a possibility that God was talking to me or a higher power was talking to me, I got brought back to those moments. There was times where I always knew the loving thing to do. I knew what the truth was. And then a second voice popped in and said, yeah, but that's not what we're going to do it. And then I questioned that. And that's what I said to myself. I laughed and I said, this is true about everyone in the entire world. Everybody has these moments where we go, I know the truthful thing to do. I know what I should do. I know what the loving thing is to do. I know, and then a second voice jumps in and says, yep, but we're not going to do it. We're going to do this. And I sought an explanation, a truthful explanation for it. That was my starting point. That was my epiphany. When I started to realize that there was two voices of guidance inside of me, and I said, what if I devoted and put a sincere gesture of faith into the first voice? What if I did that? And the coolest thing started happening. I started having more moments where I stopped thinking and I got rewarded with a state of peace. So for the first time in my life, by following this course, I felt like I was being rewarded with a state of peace. And I looked at that as a sign. And I said, that's a sign. And so I just kept on with blind faith, started to go. Eventually, as you get better at this, because that's what will happen, you will progress, you will transform, you will create a shift. You'll go from here to here. So a life center, right, that starts in your head, so interpreting life by what you think, to a heart-centered interpretation of what you know to be true. That's a whole different communication that you have to learn.
Yeah.
But one of the greatest epiphanies is this: we can see what God sees. And here's what I mean by that. Your physical side and your spiritual side, each one is completely different. They contrast one another. So physically, you observe life. The eyes of your spirit is your awareness. You can become aware of knowledge that physically you can't see, that goes beyond farther to the root cause of everything. So with me, I'm talking to people, they create a vision that I can see, and they get me to the root cause of what people, again, that are in spirit that I've never talked to, they'll get me to the root cause of what caused their death. They'll tell me information that people don't know and later find out to be true. So I use that ability in my own life. For instance, can you speak words, but before you speak them, can you see your words? Can you be aware of your words and determine whether or not they're the right words to use to produce a loving outcome? Can you see your words before you speak them and go, if I say it this way, it's not going to work out. But if I approach it this way, I can sense there's a better chance that people are going to listen to me. And the answer is yes. And it's all based on love.
Love is truly the key. Something that you said a moment ago too, I tell a lot of people with truth, with discerning truth.
Yes.
It has to be filtered through the heart. Anything, any question you have
Correct.
about anything, filter it through your heart, because this is how we know what is true. And we've just historically been a society that has been taught to be in our head, to logically think with our brain. In yoga, in the yoga practice, because I have such an extensive, history with that, we talk about the difference between, or that being ego, right? Coming from that place of ego, and how to stop those thoughts or that way of thinking, so we actually can quiet the mind and get to a place where we can be more in the heart and in that truth.
Correct.
So it's like we're talking two different languages, but it's the same thing, I think.
So now when you refer to your heart, are you talking about the physical thing that's inside of you?
No.
Good. Because a lot of times people think of it that way.
Okay.
And that's what I said.
Yeah.
I said, if I'm going to speak differently, then I have to use words that aren't going to minimize the true essence of what I want to say. So I said, do I want to say heart? And again, I was learning a communication that was based on inspiration. So that's different than your mental thinking. Your mental thinking is a separate process. Spiritual inspiration is a whole different process.
Right.
So now I'm being inspired with knowledge that doesn't lie. It always speaks the truth. And so what it shared with me was, no, that's something physical, Rich. There's a difference between the physical part of you and the spiritual part. You're talking about the center of your spirit.
Right.
This is where you lie. Start to use those words.
So the first thing, if somebody wanted to work with the abilities that they have, would be to maybe, again, is it a meditation practice? Is it a way you were self-taught? So you didn't have a systematic thing. It was something you developed on your own. What tools would you say to use for people so that they could get started with? Because I think most people out there, they don't understand what we're talking about. They're living in their head all day long.
That's key what you just said. Get an education first. Start to seek, whether it be my words or your words or words that you read someplace else, start to seek a source where somebody's explaining what they've learned for themselves to be true that resonate with you. And so when something resonates with you, that's the first thing I said. I said I would touch here. I wouldn't touch here. So I started using that word resonate whenever I started receiving information that resonated itself as true to me. And then what I would do is that I would take that moment and learn from it all. And I said, well, what else would I say resonates with me? And I would say knowledge that's only inspired to me. It doesn't come from my head. So now this is a separate location. So a simple thing like that, just take your personal experiences that happen to us and then seek an explanation for it, like anger. If you get to the core of anger, if you go and just trace what caused your anger, what triggered it inside of you, you'll find out these two things. One, it was a mental response. Two, it was a mental response to an occurrence that already happened where you didn't get what you wanted in the way that you wanted. That's universal to all people.
Yeah.
Anytime you're angry, you'll say, that was a mental response that was triggered inside of my head, it wasn't this. And how you know it was triggered inside of your head is because it's not based on love, that response.
Right.
So our thinking, that's the biggest difference that I've learned from the spiritual part of us. Your mental intelligence and your spiritual intelligence, the biggest difference between them is your spiritual intelligence is aligned and in sync with love. It doesn't know how to produce any actions or make any choices that will not produce a loving outcome. Your brain is just the opposite. Your brain is not aligned with love. It'll constantly encourage us to produce or deliver words or deliver actions that will not turn out in a loving way all the time. Yet we still follow it. And so inside of that way, when you start to look at it, you say, oh my God, again, personal experience that happened to me when I got anger, I would just take that, I would trace it and go, I didn't get what I wanted. It was all based on that. So then you say to yourself, now the healing part, right? How do you heal it all? Give up what I want.
Yeah.
What if that was never a real goal in life? What I personally want for myself? What if love actually creates unity amongst people, actually creates a harmony amongst people? What if love, if we follow it, actually synchronizes our choices where we're all making the same choices together? Isn't that a much beautiful outcome that everybody benefits from, rather than living a life on what we can get for ourselves, even if we have to be unloving to get it? And that's what control's all about.
Yeah.
And then you learn there's a difference in philosophy, in goals, ideas of success between the two sides. It's really cool.
I keep pinging back to some of my old, stuff I used to teach. So yogic lineage, Buddhist lineage, we're talking about attachment and aversion.
Yes.
These are two of the 5 kleshas, they say, which cause suffering for people, for us. So, but they're big. They're huge. And most people, I think when we start talking about those things that we're either attached to or have an aversion of, people feel very strongly about those things, and particularly when it comes to loved ones.
Yes.
That's the biggest. People sometimes will say, well, I really could detach from everything except my kids.
Yes.
Right? Or so there's always this thing that's still there. Yet these spiritual traditions have been telling us for thousands of years, there's a problem there. There's a problem with that thinking.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes. And it's exactly what you've learned for yourself, is that there's a difference in the guidance. There's a difference between your mental intelligence and your spiritual intelligence. And when you understand how to combine them, how to put them, your two intelligences, back in harmony with one another, that's all I demonstrate at my mediumship galleries.
Yeah.
I've learned to hold on to the balance that they were created to be in, and not create the imbalance, which starts when we're kids.
Yeah.
People tell us to think all the time. They never talk about your spiritual side, your spiritual intelligence, how love is just an attribute that's based on your spirit and not your mental thinking. And so when you learn to put them back in balance, that's when you'll get a response that you're in a state of peace.
Yeah.
So that's what I share with people.
Right.
If you want also another way that I started in the beginning, I would just walk around and put myself in a state of peace. And every time I did it, I now sought an explanation about what I did. Remember, that personal experience of being able to shift into a state of peace when you first weren't. You first were not, and you shifted yourself back into it. Explain that shift. that has so much wisdom into it that you can talk about it for hours.
Oh, yeah.
That simple process. But what I learned is that it's a universal explanation that everybody experiences. That's the key. Knowledge that's universal to all people, that equally applies to all people.
Yeah.
That is connected to your spirit. Knowledge that doesn't equally apply to all people is your mental thinking. Yep, that's selfish. Yep. It's really cool when you understand it, because now it empowers us that we can master ourselves. You don't get information from other people and expect it to help you. It's about mastering yourselves. It's about returning back to like the source creation that we are, which is in perfect harmony with one another, in perfect unity within ourselves. You have to return back to that source. Our spiritually unlearned society is what causes us to minimize, doubt, and dismiss the existence of our spirit and its intelligence. And that's why we create the imbalance in ourselves.
It's interesting talking about this very important connection to spirit. And I've known some people in the past who have really strong abilities, yet lacked the connection with spirit.
Yes.
And it came through very clear in the ways they were presenting the information or the sharing.
Yes.
There is a really big difference between really making that connection with God, with spirit, with presence, and then again coming from this very compassionate, loving place.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can still have these abilities, but they're coming from an egoic place.
Yes.
Right? And then there's something disjointed about the information that you're sharing, or in my case, was receiving, going, no, I don't think so.
Yes.
So you're really well known in the area, and I think that's because of how you do things, how the word pure wants to come up, but there's this kind of pure energy that you're coming into with this aspect of divinity and love, and presenting this material or this information for people. And it shows, because I can go almost anywhere and talk to somebody, and last week I was interviewing somebody. I said, "You know Rich Braconi?" She said, "Yes, I know Rich Braconi." Of course, because if you're in the area, or actually you're international, so people are really getting to know you.
Yeah.
And what's your biggest advice for people who are dabbling in this type of realm? A lot of people are, I think, really caught up in all of the clairs, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, all these abilities, skills, but they're caught in them.
Correct.
What's your biggest advice?
Probably this. It's going to sound simple, but to me it's profound. The single choice I'm saying we were all given that holds the most impact in every single person's life is the source of guidance you're going to choose to listen to and to mentor you in life. So the source of guidance is key. So a source of guidance could be a book. It can be a religion. It could be a person, right? It also could be your mental thinking, or it could be your spiritual intelligence. So your mental intelligence and your spiritual intelligence. It was probably one of the greatest challenges for me to walk away from something I was taught, that my mental thinking was my greatest source of wisdom, and being skeptical of it all, and walking away from what it was telling me and guiding me to do into a spiritual intelligence that I didn't know existed. The process to learn how to know if I'm being inspired with knowledge or thinking about knowledge was key. And so I broke it down into a couple rules.
Okay.
Can I share them?
Yeah. Ready? Rich's rules.
And these are just like a little guideline, just little tidbits, just
so
to
are
start.
any of these in the book, or is this new stuff?
I dabble in the book with this,
Okay.
but I'm going to explain it to a greater degree because the knowledge I now have is much greater than at the time when I wrote the book, which is only 2 years ago.
Another book?
Another book is, I'm in the process of writing my second book. What also is important when you were talking earlier is there's a set of natural laws that are based on love. There's not a lot of them, but when you understand them, the simple natural laws that are based on actually unconditional love, and you align yourself with them for no other reason except for, I want to become more of this, your life will completely change for the better.
Okay.
Happiness, that kind of a thing. But it's key to knowing the difference between this source of guidance and then also knowing that the knowledge to shift our life forward are two separate challenges. So the first challenge is knowing the difference. So you have spiritual visions, which are different than mental illusions. Remember, your physical side and spiritual side contrast one another, two different things.
Can you say that again?
So you have spiritual visions.
Spiritual visions.
That's going to be information in the form of visions, images that you have to properly interpret, but all of it's true.
Okay.
Then you have mental illusions. If you allow your brain to think on itself, it's going to create an illusion based on what it believes is true, but it might not be true.
Right.
Lead you down a path that is going to tell you you can succeed at when you really can't.
Right.
Two different things. There's also mental fantasies. You're going to fantasize about things on how you want them to be. You don't have the power to change things or people into how you want them to be, but your brain will never tell you that. So let's go back to the visions.
Okay.
So the visions are based on a communication that you're inspired with. So let's just talk about inspiration.
Okay.
That communication is quicker than your mental thinking. It always comes first. So you'll first say to yourself, I received something, and then your brain will always try to talk you out of it.
Okay.
So just know it's the first thing that comes to you. It's going to be subtle. It's going to be a subtle piece of information, a subtle piece of a vision, a subtle image, a subtle knowing.
And is this the first rule?
That's the first rule.
First rule is
Always comes first.
the thing that comes first
Is always connected to your spirit and coming from a higher source of knowledge.
Okay.
God, your creator, whatever you want to say. It could be someone in spirit that's connected to you because they don't think anymore. And so they only share information that's based on the truth because they don't have a brain anymore. So they're just in spirit form.